We are recording, so I may as well say welcome to this special edition of 4020 Not Live. As you can see, a screen full of people, at least if you're watching. If you're listening to the podcast, you'll have to believe me. Phil is here, and a host of names from many various aspects of rugby league. You can see we've got a former international in Ikram, but we've got the man behind Tides of History, an excellent resource of social history in Anthony Broxton. Jack Pemberton, I can't speak French. How do you pronounce 13 in French, Jack?
Treiziste.
Treiziste.
Yeah.
I did do French for you. In Wales, we don't get further than un, trois, falls a complete history to us. A lecturer in sports marketing, Kacy Mackreth, and Ian Martin, who's got us all here today. Because for all our viewers and listeners who are across the Pennines or outside of West Yorkshire, we're copying off you. You've got players in Greater Manchester and Liverpool, and we're getting money in, and you wanted to talk about that and how that can have an impact on rugby league.
Yeah, that's right. So, I'm a massive rugby league fan. I've been really since the late 80s. I'm a Leeds fan. My nana was from Leeds originally, but actually grew up in Derbyshire. So my experience, I grew up in a place where actually rugby league's not around you. It's not as accessible. And so in many ways, I saw West Yorkshire as a sort of nirvana, really, when I was growing up. And so eventually I made it to Leeds about 20 years ago, and I started teaching, and I did an RFL course and started coaching kids. And I fell in love with the game even more than possible. And as that was happening, I also fell in love with, where I was living. And so I've been living in East Leeds for about 20 years as well now. And about 2014 time, something like that, the Scottish referendum that was going on around independence of Scotland made a lot of people think, actually, what's going on there? What impact has devolution had on that part of the world? And a number of people that I know around West Yorkshire, and people I've got to know over time, start to think about, well, actually, there are things about that experience which could help us to improve life opportunities, primarily for people who live around here, where we live. And so we started talking together. We started doing events at Cass Market, Keighley Market, in Manningham, various other places around West Yorkshire, to get people to just chat really about, well, actually, if we have more opportunities and more power to do stuff where we are, what we do with it. And further down the line, now 6 years down the line, that the organisation that I was involved in setting up, Same Skies, is in the position of West Yorkshire now having a mayoral election this May, and all of that experience, and there's contacted over time, trying to put together ideas for actually what it might be that the mayor of West Yorkshire might do. And to me, and maybe this is, the evangelism of the newbie, but in reality, to me, I thought, well, if West Yorkshire's going to have a mayor, how could it possibly be the case if West Yorkshire had a mayor that they weren't actively engaged in rugby league? I mean, how many places in the world could it possibly be where rugby league matters more than it does in West Yorkshire? And that's one of the things that I love about West Yorkshire. And so during lockdown last year, when I'd normally be coaching my primary school team, I spend generally about 3 or 4 hours after school every week doing that. I absolutely love it. And I didn't have it, and I needed to, put my energies into things. So I started researching, and I started putting together a report for Same Skies to think about what actually the future of rugby league in West Yorkshire might look like. And in particular, to think about the things that made rugby league great in the first place, the found values, as I termed it, of rugby league. And then to think about, actually, if we really wanted to drive those founding values forward into the future, what might the future of rugby league look like? And in particular, I wanted to put it in the context of things which might be things that a mayor of West Yorkshire could connect with, could set the tone for, could actually lead the initiative on. The powers that are devolved directly to the West Yorkshire Mayor, primarily around things like adult skills and transport and policing, are things which touch on the edge, perhaps, of some of the things we might talk about later on rugby league. But the mayors also have this thing called the fundamental power of competence, which basically means that they can take the initiative to gather people together, to push things forward around any area that they think is important. And in West Yorkshire, I think rugby league is important. And I think actually, if we are going to make Rugby League be the game that it could be, based upon those founding values and reinterpreting those founding values for the future, then what we need to do is to talk about it, get the West Yorkshire Mayor engaged in it, get the candidates already engaged in it, so that we've got more people on our side, we've got more people who are willing to take it forward. So that's basically where I'm coming from.
I almost don't want to say this in because you might hate me, but I remember there was an election, or we had a referendum on whether we should have a mayor for Yorkshire. This would be about 10 years or so ago. And I remember going to the polling station and writing on my ballot, "What a waste of money!" And I don't want to be kind of like a Debbie Downer on this idea, but obviously we are going to have a mayor, so it's important that we, the good people of West Yorkshire, have their say on who that should be.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was a number of votes on having mayors within specific parts of West Yorkshire, and then there was the referendum in the North East, which was sort of way back in the 90s, and that referendum was something that Dominic Cummings, who a lot of people will know about, was involved campaigning against. And when the North East voted against that assembly, actually it stopped the referendum ever happening within Yorkshire itself. And, to be honest, I would like to see a more democratic assembly, and I would like to see more powers devolved and more opportunity to raise resources. But this is where we are. And as you say, in reality, whether or not actually this is what we want to see in terms of devolution, whether or not this is actually something we want at all, it's going to happen. And from the point of view of somebody who loves rugby league, I think what we've got to do is make sure it's on the agenda of the candidates, make sure it's on the agenda of the mayor, and see how we can take forward a lot of the brilliant stuff that these people around this screen I've got in front of me are already involved in, already suggesting. Because I think there's a lot of the future of rugby league that's represented in the ideas of these people here today.
I think there are two fundamentals here, and they split across the guests we've got to get some expert opinion on. One is the relationship with the sport and its communities, which is one of its undeniable strengths. And it'd be great to hear from Kacy, who clearly is from a different background, but is heavily involved in what Hunslet are doing to be relevant to their community. And Ikram, who clearly has spent most of his life since he played, getting rugby league played by more people in different communities, and what they need. Because I think the one thing we've never done is actually ask them what they want out of it. We've tried to impose something on it. I think the other thing is even pairing it a step backwards from that is the relationship between rugby league and politics. And some people who might think about, I don't really want to hear the detail of why a mayor is relevant to rugby league, would need to be reinforced with the fact that rugby league is not only born from politics, but sport and life is politics. And I think in Anthony and Jack, we've got two people again who can give us that perspective. So I don't know, should we start with the history side and maybe go to Anthony and Jack and tell us why it's so important, not only that the mayor understands, but that rugby league is understood as being part of the process that bore it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on to the show. Really appreciate it. Obviously been a long time fan, so this is a real pleasure for me. First of all, Ian, I think, should be credited for actually putting his ideas down in black and white, in paper, because I think as a sport, that's something we very rarely do. Mapping out a vision for the future. We don't really do that much in rugby league. There aren't too many framing the futures knocking about. That's why we kind of still talk about it. And as a result, I think it's hard to maybe mobilise support behind your ideas, and it's also hard to see who's accountable for what. And I think Ian stuck his neck out and he's thought deeply about it, and it deserves great attention, within the game. Reading the report, myself, I think what you've tried to get at is an issue that probably looms large over not just the game, but, broader society. And that is, how do we give people a stake in something that they, can be proud of, something that they feel, they want to be involved with. And that's the problem that rugby league's probably had for quite a while. And it's not just a question for our game, but it's a question for politicians, community leaders, the mayor that you talk about. I think regional democracy is, what you've called it. But I think politics, as you say, has been trying to get to this for many years. Devolution. In the 1990s, politicians were talking about a stakeholder society, and then David Cameron's big society, and then devolution, regional mayors. even Brexit, you could probably say, was, about taking back control. It was in the actual slogan. So there's definitely a place for, rugby league, hopefully, to be a part of that conversation. How can we give people control, of their lives? And I think what you've come up with really is a bit of a kind of modern blueprint that really does address the problems of today, not just in rugby league, but in society. So I think any politician worth the salt will be interested in it. The big conclusion I would probably say I drew from it is when you talk about identity and values, and, rugby league values, it probably holds the key to our future. That goes from growing the game in West Yorkshire, also reaching out to new areas. How can we sell this sport? And, what is it that we're actually, trying to achieve? We all sit here tonight because we believe, rugby league has something to offer society, I suppose. And we should at all times be thinking about how those values, we can bring new people of different ages, class, gender into the game. And I think being anti-discriminationary, which is at the heart of your, paper, that has to be at the heart of what we, go forward and do next. But I suppose one question I would just have for Ian, if I don't mind asking that first, is do you think regional democracy, as you've kind of outlined it in your paper, do you think that would grow the game itself? Because I'd say maybe we're quite unique in that we can talk about sport in the abstract way, and maybe people would be brought into the game and want to take part and control the clubs. But would that actually get the average punter back on side? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, maybe after Jack spoke.
So I think, going back to what Phil said initially, about sport and rugby league being politics and everything being politics, I think it's important to remember where rugby league came from. Feel free, Anthony, if I get any of these details wrong, to chip in, because you are Mr. Labour history. So it sort of came from the trade union movement, didn't it? At the same time, or a similar time to the Northern Union breaking away from the Rugby Football Union. In 1893, there were striking miners in Featherstone. There was the creation of the Independent Labour Party in Bradford. So all of these things sort of fed into rugby, and probably gave those in the Northern Union the appetite and the confidence to sort of break away from rugby union. I think without all those things going on in the workplace and sort of in society, I don't think the Northern Union would have had the confidence to break away those initial 22 clubs. And then going on from that, you've sort of got during the miners' strike in the 80s, a little bit before my time, but reading a lot of Tony Collins' work about that and sort of how clubs became hubs for sort of mutual aid and sort of supporting one another through what I imagine were really, really difficult times. Then you've got sort of the emergence of Super League in the 90s, when again Tony Collins has written about it, speaking to sort of Wakefield and Castleford fans, I believe it was, about the mergers that were proposed. One of the fans that he documents said something along the lines of, they've taken our jobs and now they want to take our leisure. They obviously being, in that man's views, the establishment. And then you've got Brexit, which has already been touched upon. I think there are a lot of parallels between Brexit and the emergence of Toronto Wolfpack. I've written a little bit about sort of how around 2016 we had the announcement of the referendum, and then shortly after, once the Leave and Remain camps got set up, we sort of had the announcement of Toronto, and Leave and Remain became expansion and anti-expansion. And I think a lot of that comes from the same place. And then you've obviously got how clubs, particularly like Wakefield, was the sort of hubs similar to like they were in the 80s and the miners' strike, sort of ringing around in the community, organising food parcels. Wakefield have done a lot of great work, sort of organising the big feed where they've fed hundreds of people and sent out thousands of meals. So yeah, I think it is important. It's political, as is everything, to be honest.
It's interesting, really, that Anthony's point kind of led on to a conversation where we got to the whole Brexit and Toronto book. And I think, for me, the interesting thing is that I never really saw Brexit or Toronto being part of Super League as one simple thing either way. And actually, I think my report was a way of trying, I think, to bring together, in my perspective at least, the love of the place that created and nurtured and sustained the game with actually the opportunity which comes for people who've grown up in that deep rugby culture of West Yorkshire when the game expands to other places. Not just in terms of opportunities for, Stevie Ward, for example, to go and work with the Canadian Cooperative Rugby League. I mean, realistically, the opportunity to grow up in Morley, as Stevie did, put him in a position where he got a lot of things out of it, which enabled him to be able to take an opportunity. And to be honest, I think this is part of what drives me personally, because growing up in Derbyshire, I know that for kids like me, the chances were you're not going to get to play rugby. It just wasn't an opportunity at that time. And there are still places around the UK where that's not the case. So, I think rugby league's got so much to offer a lot of people who at the moment just feel completely far away from the concept of rugby at all, even now. But also, actually, the expansion of the game is not something to fear for people and for clubs in West Yorkshire. It's actually about opportunities, both in terms of individuals, opportunities to go to other places, to see the world, to actually have those experiences. I know that lots of Hunslet fans, when they went to Toronto, had a fantastic time. And that was an opportunity which came from Rugby League. I had a fantastic time in Pemberton myself when I went to watch Rhinos down there. And again, that was an opportunity which came through Rugby League. And so I don't see these things as completely contradictory. But at the same time, it feels like what we need to do is explicitly draw out what we mean by that. What we mean by that is actually saying being an expansionist doesn't mean that you don't care about the sustainability of Hunslet or Featherstone or Batley or any of the other clubs that really have made Rugby League possible for so long. The two things to me aren't contradictory. So in terms of the specific proposals, what I've said is that Rugby League must aim to provide life chances for people here and around the world. And also it must strive to be professional, competitive, sustainable and accountable. So we need to go for professionalism. We need to make sure that we actually have a game which is sustainable. But at the same time, what we need to do is to make sure that we have those deep roots in terms of where the game came from, the people who nurtured it over a long period of time. And I thought it was very interesting that towards the end of days in terms of Toronto's life, that one of the things that started to happen was that there were trade visits which made the relationship between Toronto and the places where Toronto were playing and started to develop those kind of links. And I think from the point of view of a West Yorkshire mayor, one of whose roles and responsibilities is about regional economic development, there are specific things there actually in terms of the connections between businesses and the economy in West Yorkshire and other parts of the world where Rugby League is played, which could be something that actually is really taken forward and driven forward. But it's always about, are you going to take the initiative? Are you going to do something about it, or are you not? And I really want to make sure that the candidates and the person who's elected the West Yorkshire mayor knows that actually, if they're going to be a West Yorkshire mayor, they have to take Rugby League seriously.
Kacy, you're obviously involved at Hunslet. They've just been mentioned there, and they are an important part of the community. It's important that whoever does hold this role sees how important Rugby League is to communities big and small across the county.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of before I get to the Hunslet role, I mean, I'm obviously not from Yorkshire. My accent hasn't changed dramatically, but I've been in Leeds for 16 years. I'm American. I grew up in American sports. I'm a female. I didn't know what Rugby League was up until probably maybe 2012. And I think to, all the other panels' point of view, as a marketer, I was specifically interested in the sport as a sports product because it was a fast-paced game, easy to understand. It had all the attributes of American sport that I grew up with and loved. And I think from my perspective, as similar to the panel members, I saw a massive gap from a marketing and sport management perspective. There is nothing in academic research on the sport of rugby league. There's a little bit in the NRL. There's stuff about, performance and development, but not from a management perspective. So back in 2014, when the sport decided to change the league structures again, I went in and interviewed all the championship clubs at the time because I felt that they had the most to gain. And obviously, there's lots of research around elite level professionalized sports, but not so much down once you go down the lower tiers. So I first kind of got introduced into rugby league, and I was never coming at this as an expert of the sport. I would say that I'm a spectator. I'm probably not even a fan. And then from that, it kind of grew from there about really understanding not only the history and the heritage, but also the barriers that the sport has faced. Again, if you have a great sports product, a lot of it isn't just about, build it and they will come sort of thing. It has to be much more than that. And one of the things that I and then obviously after that piece of research, I decided to do a part-time PhD in rugby league. So I've been doing that since 2016. It's a long passion of mine. But then re-examining the impact on changing the league structures and the managerial and marketing implications that has on the sport as a whole. So I think my first attempt at this was then to get to look, and I think to Ian's point, which was great, is understanding the rugby league ecosystem. As someone that's new, and there's lots of bashing of the RFL or this manager and that club and all sorts of other things, the reality is the ecosystem of rugby league is so complex just as a starting point, and obviously someone that is coming in that doesn't have the emotional connection, it's a little bit easier for people that are, and obviously now being at Hunslet, I understand the massive rivalry between the Rhinos and Hunslet, and, passion sometimes takes over strategic thinking. But, for me, it was really understanding that, we need to understand the users, the consumers or participants. We need to understand the sport organizations as entities in their own right. We then obviously, without a team and two teams playing, you don't have a spectator sport product. And then from that, you also then need to understand the role of the governing body, the cooperation that needs to happen. And then more specifically, once we start looking at the sport product itself, there's differentiations between whether we're talking Super League, Championship, League One, or in fact grassroots or the amateur side of the game. There's so many different things that we need to, if we are going to be strategic, need to really dissect and understand as a starting point. So I think that was one of the things that really kind of came through. And, my research actually is kind of looking at all those areas. And I didn't want to just focus on one area, even though people have told me, Kacy, that's just too big of a beast. But so I think that was the first starting point. And then obviously I did 16 interviews with stakeholders across the sport at a crucial time of change management in 2018. All that I'm still analyzing. But then for me, really what I think was the missing piece is the fans and the spectators and what they valued and why they fell in love with this sport, and was it similar to my experiences. So I didn't do it as a traditional marketer would be, as have an annual fan survey and send it out there. I wanted them to tell me their fan stories and ask them to generate imagery to facilitate their subconscious thinking, so memories, drawing on those memories of what the sport, their thoughts and feelings of what rugby league means to them. And to be honest, that was my favorite bit of the research. And because again, it told different stories, and I wanted stories from, again, League One all the way through to Super League to see if there was any differences. And that helps shape and give us a better understanding from a marketing around brand values and all of that. So it has all of those elements too, to then be able to pull these two elements of the ecosystem together. So that's something that I'm doing, because at the heart of all of this is, if we do want to grow, we need to understand the opportunities that are available for the sport. We also need to understand the accessibility. So, as a new fan or spectator, if I'm coming into your sport and I've come into and I want to bring my family, are you making it easy for me to feel welcome and accepted? And then if you're not, then break down those barriers so that you're not just preaching to the converted or your loyal fan base. We have to scan and make sure that we are, again, to everyone's point, build on the history and the heritage, embrace it, use that as a unique, that's what we're doing at Hunslet, use it as a unique positioning statement to remind people what we stand for, but also what our unique attribute is. We're not trying to compete with Leeds Rhinos. We're not a Super League team. We want to be at the heart of the community and be the only supporter-owned club, recognizing the barriers that we actually face. Being a supporter-owned club, everyone's voluntary, and my commitment of a non-executive director, I thought was, I'll just show up to a board meeting a month and bring in some marketing students to help out the club. And then did I quickly realize when I'm getting emails of like, who's going to wear the PP on, the opening match, because we can't, obviously we have to be limited of who we have and stuff, and, or who's running for Rob Burrows, event and so on and so forth. And so you recognize that is also an important element. And I do think, and again, I can say this quite objectively as an outsider, I love this sport. I think it has so much to offer. I think there is obviously the history, the heritage, the changes, Rugby League is not afraid to innovate or, in fact, evolve. Whether it's a strategic evolvement can be another discussion, I'm sure, altogether. But for me, what we're doing at Hunslet is just paring back and recognizing within our resources, we have to think more creatively. We have to think about what purpose we are to the Hunslet community. So we can think about how we once were and review the history and heritage, but what meaning does our club nowadays have within Hunslet and South Leeds, and what impact should it have in the future, because of the demographics changing around the area. I think in the report I thought was really interesting, Ian, about, how obviously Tony Collins has talked about the changes from the 1950s to the early 80s about the population and the different people that are coming into the area, and the condensed marketplace of sport, rugby league, and leisure opportunities is, again, we're all competing, whether we like it or not, for people's attention and leisure time and pound and effort that goes along with that. But I do think what's really unique is something that I have observed as just someone coming new, but it's about the community and the opportunity of this family-oriented approach across all three divisions that you are losing in this very commercialized world. You're losing it amongst football, and as the world, and I can say this because in America we over commercialize everything. We're happy to rip down a stadium, build a new one because we're going to get a bigger sponsor. We're quite happy from a cultural perspective, but I do think the value and the unique selling point of the sport is that community aspect and the family connection, and again, it's northern working class roots. We shouldn't shy away from that. We should literally embrace it and use it to our advantage, but in an unapologetic manner. Yeah. So a lot of people I've spoken to, everyone almost apologizes for that we are a minority sport, and and that we don't market it very well, and we don't do this. Everyone kind of apologizes, almost this ashamed aspect cloud that kind of covers the sport. And but the fans, they stand shoulder to shoulder. They will scream and shout about how great the sport is, and I think we have to stop being so apologetic for where we are and just try to reposition things.
Should we apologise to IkRam because he hasn't said anything yet? I feel we should apologise to you, let alone apologise about the sport. There's one thing I've always wanted to ask a former player, and I haven't had the opportunity yet, so I'll ask you this question. And I don't mean to ask you this on behalf of every single player you've played alongside and with and against, but we know, because Phil mentions it all the time, how tough it is for you to go out there and play, and how fast the sport is and how hard the hits are. Do you feel that the effort you put in is matched by those who run the sport, that you're getting the best conditions you can by the people who are running things?
First of all, Richard, no apologies required, and thank you to the whole team for listening to some of the things that you had to say. Really interesting. They say Hunslet is a great club. It was my last club in my professional era, and I'm great to hear some of the work that's going on. And something which touched me when you mentioned it's about the community and families. And when Ian asked me to would I want to come onto this show, I was delighted to, on the basis of the discussion that we had about inclusion and rugby and politics, something that I'm very interested in. Richard, it's a tough question. I mean, in some of the areas that I'm really keen and interested in, I feel that some of the powers to be, the establishment, are not doing enough. But I can say what I've seen from the inclusion board and what's going on, I hear a lot of positive stuff is happening, and that's been a long time coming. It's here and certainly welcome. We talked about embracing. I think we should embrace it and support it. And it's not a rugby problem. It's an issue for everybody. I think we should all get involved. And you know, they're doing the best they can. Okay, whether it's good enough, I think the public and we can sort of be the judge of that. Everybody has their opinions on that. But I think we could do more as a governing body, as a sport. We recognise it's the best sport in the world. No qualms about that. It is. And most people will tell you that when they watch it. It is. I miss it so much. But when I watch it now, I'm silly. Don't think I can keep up with the pace and the conditioning and the big hits, what goes on. But it's certainly a great sport to watch and certainly enjoy. Rugby and politics. Sorry, Rich, I think I just jumped in there.
No, it's okay.
Does that answer that question, though, what you asked?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just jump a little bit with rugby and politics. Really interesting. My sort of journey with politics was the parliamentary group when Greg Mulholland was former MP for Leeds North West, was the chair of that group. And it was a journey, and it was an interesting journey because I got involved because I was hoping that they would play a part in challenging the establishment as a neutral group when there's issues about equality, diversity, inclusion, areas that I'm really keen on. And through my early journeys, and even to an extent right now, there wasn't really much engagement. So I was hoping that group would be part of the change or help to bring about a change, a positive change. First of all, to address it. It didn't do the job that I was expected it to be. Questions were asked, things were being... I presented to the parliamentary group way back when Neil Turner was the secretary then, the MP for Wigan. Lovely bloke. And like most, it was well received, taken on board, but nothing was done. So I've titled my paper here, Missed Opportunities. And I say that because we've had lots of opportunities to take advantage of the situation. Stacey, you mentioned about research. I think Leeds Beckett, they were known then, Metropolitan University, did a research in the early days on... it certainly was a study done by Leeds Metropolitan University, and it was quite an in-depth study, which was well received. Unfortunately, it wasn't taken advantage of, and it's just a document, I think, which is just probably shelved. But as Rugby League, we've had some good initiatives in the past. If you all remember Tackle It, I know Tackle It is coming out now again, which is great, good to see. But we had it in the past, but then it sort of was shelved. And you may tell me why it was. There may be a reason why. I'm from the point of view that it was a good initiative, it should have continued, but it died a death. And then we also had a Faith initiative, which I was really keen on, and I supported. I thought one of the ways of engagement was the multi-faith. They play a large part in the communities, and that was sort of shelved afterwards. So, and that's one of the reasons why we set up BARA, the British Asian Rugby Association, because on one hand they were saying there wasn't a great deal of engagement, support from the South Asian primary communities. And I'm saying, just hold on, we've got lots of players playing in the amateur ranks and 1 or 2 in the professional ranks, which weren't highlighted. And I felt there was a desperate need to highlight these potential positive role models, that we could get more people to look up to, inspired by, and take part in the game. And I think we didn't do that as well as we should have done. I think we're on our 16th year this year. Obviously, the pandemic hasn't helped, but that's across the board. So I think that we've had some great role models out there. I think we've had an opportunity to get involved and make a difference, bring about a change in the wider communities. And there's some great examples by the governing body, pockets, and certain clubs as well. So I'm not going to say that there hasn't been a great deal of change, but throughout the last 15, 16 years in my involvement in development, working with or alongside the governing body and some professional clubs and grassroots clubs, small pockets and not enough, and I think we've missed that chance. That said, as I mentioned from the start, we've seen some positive improvements. I like what I'm seeing, I like what I'm hearing, and I certainly get behind that to hopefully make a difference. We've got the World Cup coming, and that should be positive. Touching on the inclusion, I mentioned this to you when we first spoke, it's great that we're having inclusion because that's what the game's all about. Women and girls, disabilities, the wheelchair game. But I still see the South Asian engagement still at the bottom of that list, which is quite disappointing. And if I may add, it's not a dig, Ian, but even your document that you've written, I disciplinedly read it when it came to the South Asian. I looked at the inclusion section, and there was very little, if any. I think there's a caption of what my good mate Tony Hannon wrote about him in Batley. But there's been a lot of good stuff. And I could reel off names in the amateur game, in the professional game, lots and lots of names. I mean, Hunslet, Stacey, well, on that case, on that subject, you had a young lad called Amrez Ahmed, signed schoolboy forms at 14, played at Leeds Academy under 19s when they won the trophy. Good lad, could play the game really, really well, and nobody really capitalised on his skills. And even now, I don't think anybody's spoken to these players, even after the game, about engagement, encouragement. How do we work with the wider community? In regards to rugby and politics, I think it's really important, and you touched upon it, Ian, on a couple of points in your document. I think it's really important. It's something which I really believe about. Sometimes people say politics should be kept out of rugby. I think, how can it? I think people's lives naturally is bigger than the sport, but for some people, sport is all they have, and I think we need to hold on to that. But I think we need to look at the ethic and moral side of politics and sport when it comes together. You showed a couple of examples in your document, and correctly so, and there's the examples that we could. And I suppose everybody's to their own, but we're dealing with people's lives here. That's what you talked about in your document, particularly around West Yorkshire. It's all they have, and I think that it certainly, in my opinion, can build a lot of bridges across the divides, and certainly for me, rugby has played a large part in who I am today, and I'm sure if you spoke to a lot of players, they will say the same.
I think two themes are starting to emerge from everything that everyone's saying, and I think they relate directly back to why Ian thinks that a West Yorkshire mayor should take Rugby League seriously. But again, just want to pare it back one step from that. Identity and relevance are the two areas. The first is, do we have an identity? And Kacy touched on it. It has to involve tradition and heritage, but also it has to be part of whatever the modern living experience is. And Hunslet is a classic example of If we'd have been having a conversation about who was the dominant rugby league team in the city of Leeds 100 years ago, it would have been Hunslet. The whole of the industrial centre of this region was based there. There were 20,000 people living in back-to-back houses around. The ground, the schools were all rugby league schools. Everything was geared at rugby league had a defined and distinct identity. I think the other thing is, what relevance does the sport have in this modern day and age? So that if you went to a West Yorkshire mayor who wasn't specifically versed in the values that you've all talked about, the community aspect, how would you sell the sport? What do we mean to the communities that provide the players, that watch it, the commercial sponsors of it? Is that something that we as a game need to get right first before we can sell your document to a West Yorkshire mayor?
I think that the truth is the West Yorkshire mayor is going to be elected in just over a month's time. So to a certain extent, this is happening and we either engage with it or we don't. And I think if we don't engage with it, we're going to miss another opportunity. Because fundamentally, even though this is a form of devolution that maybe doesn't go as far as a lot of people would like, realistically, it creates a figurehead, it creates an opportunity for West Yorkshire distinctively to be represented. It creates capacity around the mayor for things to be taken forward. So I think in terms of waiting, no, definitely not wait. Let's get on, let's engage with it, let's do it. But in terms of what we're about as a sport, what our identity is and how that relates specifically West Yorkshire, I think there is a lot of debate to be had. And to be honest, I didn't grow up in West Yorkshire myself. I have not particularly played rugby league at a particularly high level myself. And there are lots of people with a lot more to offer, specifically in terms of their experiences, than I ever could. So the report primarily was trying to get debate, trying to get conversation going. And I'm more than willing to obviously listen to people with perspective and experiences about how things within there don't reflect reality, have debates about exactly elements of it which may not sit with people. What I really want to do is to get people in West Yorkshire talking about what regional democracy might be for them, and in particular, people within rugby league thinking about the opportunities that might come from it in terms of progressive way forward. And so I've got a view in terms of what I think it should be about. I mean, one of the things that does me head in, to be honest, just now, is that, this game was founded on the principle of broken time in 1895, and we've got these incredible rugby league players who get shown on television, on Sky Sports and on the BBC. They have to train in a pretty much professional way all the time. There are people paying money to go and see them at Wheatwood, for example, or at the Jungle, for example, and they have sponsors who actually get their names on their shirts, and yet they're not paid a single penny for the amount of time that they are training, committing to the club, or playing at all. And of course, I'm talking about women's Super League players. And I find it incredible, to be honest, that that's not more of a debate that's happening already. And I would say that as a fundamental, what we should be saying is that whatever the way forward in terms of making it happen, we have to commit as a game to making sure that women's Super League players are paid for the time that they're putting into the game as soon as is possible. And there are various ways forward in terms of how we do that. I mean, Phil, you and I have often been up to Wheatwood to watch Leeds Rhinos women. I've seen Richard there a few times as well. I've been to quite a lot of association football games at places like Garforth and Frickley and Guiseley, and the crowds are smaller, and yet they're being paid their match fees. And the amount of money that people are paying on the gate is often about the same amount. So in reality, they've made it possible within those levels of association football. And I just think women's Super League players deserve to be paid for that time, and we've got to find a way to do it. The other way of looking at it is saying, well, actually, the game as a whole needs to put something forward in that sense. And therefore, the parts of our game which do make profit, and it may well be relating to things like the Grand Final, the Challenge Cup Final, further ahead in terms of the Rugby League World Cup, those elements of the game which are money-making, we need to say that elements of those need to go into the women's game to make sure that at least there is a level of payment for those players going forward. I don't know the extent to which at the moment it is the case that there are young women players who are having to work at certain times, which means that they're not able really to get to the levels in terms of rugby league that they should be doing, they could be doing. But it's definitely the case that I find incredible that, I'll go to Bolton, I'll cheer on Leeds Rhinos winning the Challenge Cup final. We'll see fantastic performances from Courtney Hill and Danny Caprime and, Lois Fossell and Sophie Robinson, all these incredible athletes. And then I'm getting paid the slightest bit of any of the work that they're putting in to represent my club. And I would say that, what we've got to say basically is that we've got to find an answer to that. So in terms of values, in terms of what we're about, that's what I think. But I'm very happy for people to debate it and take it off in different directions, but engage with it. And we need to engage with it now because this mayor's going to be elected in just over a month.
I've got this strange sense, and I don't know what Jack and Anthony think about this, but in terms of, we talked about expansion and expansionists versus traditionalists and whatever, but I get the feeling with some people that they think that coverage of Women's Super League is somehow going to take away coverage of the men's game, whereas we've seen in football, it's an addition to. I've got the TV on right now. We're recording this on Monday night. I'm watching the Leeds Rhinos netball team, who didn't exist before, whenever, and they're on TV. It's not taking coverage away from anything, and if anything, every single part of our sport, which isn't men's Super League, which everyone has had some kind of exposure to on TV. It's been on TV since the 50s, so everyone's going to have seen men playing rugby league, but they might not have seen women play Super League. They've not seen the wheelchair game, which they will do later this year, or PDRL or whatever. And these are parts of the game which we can use to grow the sport as a whole.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And it goes back to what, Kacy and Phil have said about values. The women's game can be part of a new kind of identity for the sport, but it has to properly be planned and mapped out, and we all kind of need to be a part of it so that when we talk about the game, we treat women equally. The pundits are used on Sky Sports. We have a stake in the club when they're playing. You can do matches back to back. I think it has to become a part of the identity of the sport. We talked about we're being a working class game and maybe being a bit ashamed of that. But I think at times we kind of hide behind the working class aspect, and we don't want to do things because we're a working class game. That can range from many different things. Even Prince Harry being involved in the sport, people weren't happy because we're a working class game. What does that mean in the 21st century? It made a lot more sense in the 1950s and 60s when players were working class, actually working the same jobs as the fans on the terraces. It was a different relationship. We're now a professional era. I think, the women's game can add something to our brand. And, the point that Kacy was making about when someone goes to a game at Hunslet and they're saying, well, what does this sport give to me? If there's a women's game on as well and a man's game, well, okay, a mother might take a kid and they might let the kid play, and you develop that relationship at different levels. It's not just about, the top line. So I think, and in terms of people who are critical of the women's game, I think you're just probably going to get that, in any sport, and it's up to the leadership of the sport to be continuing telling the message of why it's good for the game as a whole that we develop it. And if that means paying women properly and finding a way to do that, then we should all be brought along with that. But it has to come from the top, I think, and it has to be continually told about why we're doing these things. And we don't often get that, I think, in Rugby League.
I'm not sure where we'll find that money from. I mean, I'll bring Jack into things here.
That's a hard question for another podcast. Yeah.
There's only so many raffles you can do, unfortunately. I mean, I'm still getting over Jack mentioning he was too young to remember the miners' strike. I was a child when it was on, obviously, but I'm of the age where pretty much everyone would have been the son of a miner, which is not a thing nowadays, and probably would have been down the pit if I was born a bit earlier. But I don't know, Jack. What do you think about the various other aspects of the sport and how they can help grow things, and why the West Yorkshire Mayor should take plenty of interest in them?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Anthony's just said there. I think I agree that we need to look at paying the women for the time that they put into the sport. I think there is the money there to do it. The Super League clubs have just spent or are about to pay out £750,000 just for speaking to a private investment firm. I can think of at least a dozen ways that money could be much better spent. So if they've got that sort of money just for a chat with an investment firm or whatever they were, I think they can find a couple of £100 to give the women that are putting their bodies on the line as well. I think the RFL's attitude towards it, and a lot of people high up in the game, is that things need to be left alone. You can't be seen to plan anything. I think that ties in with North American expansion as well. I've written about before how the places that we're basing teams in Canada seem to be based on where one person's family live. Eric Perez, I think he's done a lot of great work, but he's from Toronto, if I remember rightly, so he set up a team there, and his family live in Ottawa, so he set up a team there. There's got to be more planning than that. I think it's a little bit too sort of leave it to the clubs or the markets or whatever to sort out. But I think the women's game is a good vehicle for growing the game. I remember seeing somewhere, I can't remember where now, but female spectators make up 40% of Rugby League's audience, but it's nowhere near 40% of the playing pool. And when we're talking about dwindling participation figures and stuff, that is a really easy place to start for me. We've got to be looking at getting more women and girls playing rugby league. If they're already interested in the sport, let's get them playing. Whether that's through full contact, I'm not so sure. I think touch, cross league, tag rugby, they're all good avenues to grow the game as well. Now, I'm not saying that we need to sort of forget about full contact rugby league. That is the sort of main focus of everything that we should do. But we need to start thinking outside the box a little bit more about how we grow the game and what we do. And I think those newer variants, women's game, PDRL, LDRL, those are all places that we can start that are quite easy to reach.
I would just agree and just say society is changing, and it's not just going to be about the men's sport anymore. Like you say, PDRL, Women's Super League. If we can there might be an opportunity for Rugby League to kind of be the more progressive sport that kind of aligns all of it together and finds a way of just promoting them as much as possible to as many people, and just having the values shared between at different level, and just having the kind of people to go out and talk about them, and being a kind of trailblazer in doing that, because I don't think many sports really do that at the minute. And if we are looking for a kind of gap in the market in a really crowded field, maybe we can be the progressive game, for the future. And people look at our values and see themselves in the sport, and that's why they are interested in it first. And that's going to take a lot of work from like the top, I would say, to kind of define the new values of the game and have standards, and players would have to live up to them as well, and sponsors may have to be different. Betting companies might not be part of that, but it's all tough to do when you're a sport that's as economically challenged as we are, and you have to compromise on them things. So it all has to kind of be planned differently, I think, if we want to grow in a different way and go in a different direction, which Ian's proposed.
If I just might add, Jack, I think a good few years ago that percentage was talking about then. So it certainly is an area that we capitalise on. I think from a neutral sort of individual, I think the women's game has really taken off to heights. I think it's fantastic. You talked about the variants. I think full contact at least give people the opportunity to have a choice of what variant they want to play. Let's give it the full whack. I think it certainly makes me proud from a rugby league sort of perspective that we are branching out, and it's a sport that we can showcase all people get involved. I just wish it was more diverse across the board.
I think from a female perspective, one of the things that I think is really interesting is about, obviously, yes, we do want women to be paid, for their professional time. But I think we also have to remember that, Women's Super League in the professional format has only been in existence for a very short time. And I think we have to, rugby league is not a rich sport. If we are comparing to big announcements like today with the Women's Super League and the amount of new investment from broadcast deals and so on and so forth, there's only a finite amount of resources and money, and where sponsors and consumers will spend and invest. So we have to kind of think about not just about rugby league, the men's, the women's, all the different kind of alternative sports products, but we have to think about the development and developing a professional sport. Even if we're talking just about the women's game, we can't just wave a wand and then overnight we now have girls that are able to play at that level. So obviously we have seen an increase in women's and girls playing by 3%, I think, from 2017, which is a phenomenal, which again shows that there's an interest, there's progress. But we have to obviously thinking about the association and the link between participation and then attendance and fandom. So obviously I teach sport marketing, so I understand about sport consumer behavior and how do they become sport consumers? Well, they become sport consumers by, again, my previous point, opportunity accessibility. So what are the socializing agents that have influenced them to become, enrolled or participating? What's their first experience? Did the dad play rugby league and then the mom decided to take her kids along to it? And then was it delivered in school curriculum? Probably not. Was it actually an after school activity at your local primary school? Sometimes possibly not. So those are then the barriers around what then exposure that we have. And that's where I think, again, rugby league, from a foundation perspective, that is one of the most unique selling points across the whole entire sport entity, because it's touching on all those community things. So what's connecting clubs might be dementia, it might be different kind of programs. So what is the club being able to offer? So then I want to go eventually potentially watch a game of rugby league because my son or daughter is either in the dance troupe or plays or actually has been taught by the foundation team, to help with player development pathway and things along those lines. So I think that's the other thing for me. One, obviously we have to think about, I suppose, the identity in the future is what role is not only the economic impact. And I know the Rugby League did put out a report in 2019 with some independent research from Manchester Met about the social impact of the sport as well. So we have to kind of think about that. But also I always say, so every time football does a better job at targeting the next generation of participants and socializes them into playing their sport, the sport of rugby league will lose out. And as consumer customization is changing of, again, more kids involved in esports, how relevant are we for the 18 to 24-year-olds? And, what are we doing to connect with those to make them, want to, again, either come back into the sport or maintain their, spend within the sport or their consumption levels in the sport as well.
So I think this brings up another issue which is linked into relevance and identity, and that's image. Do we have a good enough self-image is one question, but also what should our image be? We jokingly say that a lot of people who are not born into rugby league still think of it as northern industrial working class, played in the winter in the mud with Eddie Waring commentating. Now that may be a USP if you want to use it that way, and the analogy I've seen is, country music is from a specific part of North America, but it doesn't mean it can't be popular globally. It plays on the fact of what it is to make it something bigger. Who are we? What should we be? And how should we sell ourselves? How can we retain the historic past that we've had that is so important to the core of who we are? But how can we attract a new audience and, I guess, appeal to the office of West Yorkshire Mayor to say, if you're going to get behind anything, then the image that we're portraying is modern, vibrant, relevant, into the socially disadvantaged, but also providing top quality entertainment at the highest level. Do we need to do some work on that, do you think?
My attraction to Rugby League really, in the first place, was about a set of values. And it was only really after that I'd understood that those values were created within a particular geographical context, and that was a meeting point which took place at the George Hotel. So, for me, it was values first, and then I realised, well, these values actually came from working class men predominantly. The role of women wasn't properly acknowledged at that stage. Working class men who were predominantly from the industrial north, and they met together at the George Hotel in 1895 to put this together. So to me, I think that there's definitely something about this is where it was created. This is the place that nurtured it. These values initially came from that place. But actually, if you really love it, if you really love Rugby League, and if you really love West Yorkshire, you share it. You actually have pride in it, and you want to get it out there so that others can actually understand what it is that's special about culture in West Yorkshire, what is special about this brilliant way of spreading West Yorkshire's culture, and that being Rugby League. And so, for me, the appeal that I've already made to a lot of the West Yorkshire mayoral candidates is, well, actually, this is something which is distinct and special about West Yorkshire, but actually, in terms of all the things we want to achieve, the way forward is to look outwards from there, to be so proud of it that we want to share it.
Yeah, so I suppose there's two different images of the game. The image that the fan projects on it in somewhere like Hunslet or Featherstone or Oldham or Wigan or whatever, and then there's the image nationally, which is what Phil's alluding to of people thinking maybe negative about the sport. Eddie Ware in winter and that image that we had. I've been looking, the dawn of Super League for a recent article that you mentioned at the beginning. I think the 1980s, that was when Rugby League's image did start to change radically. Beginning of the 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s, it's still Eddie Waring, it's still, part-time, it's still played, in the north of England. And then you have changes happening, such as Fulham are brought into the competition. You have test matches moved to bigger stadiums. You have World Cup challenges, and the image of the game starts to change a bit more. It goes more professional. And, but I think that, with the birth of Super League, what Maurice Lindsay was trying to do, I suppose, was talking about an entrepreneurial spirit into the game. It's very different than the kind of conversation that we're having here, where we're talking more about a fan-led model, which might prove that society has actually changed and that we should maybe going down a different route for our image. And the only thing I will say as well is whether players themselves can actually change the image of the game and, do things to raise the profile and bring politicians on board. Because if you think about, someone like Marcus Rashford now, in football, but, Rugby League could maybe be learning how he's kind of linked ideas of social justice to, being a professional athlete. And that might be the way that sports people are changing. People are actually wanting them to be part of the community, to care about things, in the local area. Is there an opportunity, Ian, do you think, with the ideas that you're putting forward, that we can actually get some of the players to be the kind of change that we envisage, as well as, just administrators and fans?
I mean, I've mentioned this because we're a year on from this now. When a certain player signed for the Catalan Dragons, the clubs and players were told not to make any comment about it whatsoever. Now, some of them had more of a social conscience, perhaps, or didn't want to get in trouble. And Tom Johnson's the obvious example, because obviously I'm a fan of his because he plays for my club, but he made a point on social media about how he wasn't happy about it and how the sport should be inclusive. And he continues to make interesting points on his social media. Do we not? There are some in the game who make points on social media which should be not celebrated, and I don't think are perhaps dealt with strongly enough as players and coaches and other people involved and employed by clubs. But we should do more to celebrate those people, because at least they have their heart in the right place and they're trying to use their platform, albeit not quite as big as Marcus Rashford, for good.
I mean, I 100% agree. The other thing I think that's unique about rugby league is the players. They are the biggest asset of the clubs, but they're not known. They're not leveraged as assets. They're not, probably paid enough. They're probably not, built up on a pedestal enough. I mean, what they put through, and again, like I said, I am no expert on the actual sport of playing rugby league, but the athleticism is unbelievable. And I think that one of the things is, things that frustrate me is, yes, I appreciate marketing. I appreciate the fact that, we need revenue streams from sponsorship, right? And obviously for me, though, is when I see a giant sponsor across the back of shirts and I don't even know who the player is, and I've got to wait for something to come across the screen or Google it to figure out who that person is, that's a bit of a problem, So we're not necessarily utilizing them as assets and building up their profiles. There's more people that have bigger influencer, impact on Instagram that are on Love Island than we do these athletes. And I think it's just morally wrong, So what we really need to do is we need to get some of these rugby league players, no offense, this would be my strategy, is literally get a couple on Love Island, get a couple on, Strictly Come Dancing and stuff to, again, raise the awareness of the players and actually, use them as a voice. We are seeing a wave of, again, back to the point about athlete activism. Let's use their voices. Let's use, as a sport that is kind of built on a lot of social injustice. Again, we need to be utilizing these athletes, and also their personalities are great. They're accessible. If I want to be a football fan of Virgil van Dijk or something, I'm never going to, I can stalk him on his social media platforms that, his publicist probably is doing his tweets for him. You get that authenticity from the athletes, but, we're not recognizing or building them up as the assets that they could be.
At the time of me looking, it was a few weeks ago now. I'll use Tom Johnston because I think he should be the poster boy for rugby league in this country at the minute because he is just a walking highlights reel. He scores some of the most ridiculous tries you will see. And if you go to his Twitter account, he's got just over 5,500 followers. The number of followers he's got is less than Wakefield's average crowd over the last 10 years, which to me is just absolutely unforgivable. And that's on us as a sport, I think. The fans, other players, and rugby league media, to be honest. I think one of the reasons I started writing was, to tell the types of stories and write the types of things that nobody else was doing, which I think we need to be doing. We need to be building our own players' platforms, because there's only so much that the national media are going to do for rugby league, because they're largely southern based, they're largely middle class, and they might not be conspiring against rugby league anymore like they used to, but they probably just won't know enough about the game to write about it. So I think it's on rugby league to build the profiles of their own players. And just going on to the sort of social justice thing, I just wanted to ask you guys what you think. But, I spoke right at the top of this chat about how rugby league started. It has links. There was a Hull FC administrator who was a Spanish Civil War veteran. They had a local branch of the Communist Party leader was on the board at Hull FC. And we've gone from that type of thing to, some of the things I've seen said about Black Lives Matter, some of the reactions to what the NRL player Toby Rudolph, isn't it? What he's said in the last few weeks, and we've got now, Super League club chairmen running as Tory party candidates. So I just wondered what you thought about how much the sport has changed. Because do you think it's because the North has changed? You know, a lot of Northern red wall seats went Tory at the last election. So I just wondered, you know, your thoughts on is it the sport that has changed?
I've got a tweet because I keep hold of screenshots of things just in case I need them for the future. I'm not going to name the person who tweeted this. It was in June 2017, so I can't remember the context necessarily, but here's what it says anyway. Root them out and burn them out. Enough is enough. When are we going to take a stand on these filthy bastards, probably known to police again? Now, the person who tweeted that is still involved in Rugby League. I don't think suffered any censure for that tweet.
It's interesting what we were talking about just then, about elevating the players and letting them be themselves and promoting them a bit more. And we absolutely have to do that, because if we were a working class sport and a rebellious sport, shall I say, we would do things that were really different than other sports. You know, we would have people saying outrageous things. Now, I'm not saying outrageous things like that, but I mean maybe about your opponents. You know, things to grab headlines. We've got Wigan League coming up on Friday, Thursday, whenever it is. What's been said? Have Wigan and League been going at each other? And, you know, I really need to see this because this guy said that about the other guy. The way that we talk in the pub about it. We don't do that. We've gone like a kind of like professional style where players aren't really allowed to say what they think, or they're media managed. You know, maybe in a way we're worried about what they're going to say. We have to give them, I think, the freedom to say what they want, but we might have to actually teach them, you know, how to kind of get a headline or say that about that player or about Yorkshire or Lancashire and build a bit of hype around a game, you know, that fans can get involved as well. But I think maybe because of the things that you're, you know, just read out, Richard, people in the sport are a bit worried about doing that because of their image. But I suppose what have we got to lose if we give players a bit more freedom to, I don't know, make a bit of a name for themselves? I don't know, maybe thinking out a bit too deeply about that one. But yeah, I think something needs to be done to promote the players better, and maybe we need to let them off the reins a bit.
Wasn't there a club tweeted something last year taking the mickey out of another club and then apologised for it?
I'm all for that. Yeah, no, like, I don't understand why Wigan can't slag Lee off when we know that the fans would do that. You know, bring up a bit of interest to the game. But like I say, maybe they're worried about how it would spill over professionalism. I don't know. I don't know why we don't do it more.
I think in answer to Jack's point, which is relevant to the whole discussion that we've been having about who we are, how we sell ourselves, what people think of us, I think there is an alienation of the traditional supporter base, which you can relate back to the changing working class, that the sport that they thought that they supported and what it stood for is almost passing them by, which brings us to another really interesting point, bearing in mind that the West Yorkshire Mayor will have something like £38 million to spend any given year. And how do you get a piece of that pie, which is part of what this debate is all about, that you're proving yourself to be worthy enough of consideration above other sports and causes to be funded and supported and talked about in a public arena. And again, it'd be interesting to get Ikram's thoughts on this, because he played over the period where the game started to change, and we seem to now have a full-time professional element, which is slightly resented from the part-time community-led traditional element. And Ikram played over that period where that change was starting to happen. And I think that until we reconcile that as a sport and decide how each of the elements that are our USPs that Kacy has talked about, in that, yes, foundations of Super League teams do fantastic work in deprived communities, but they are taking in the logo of those teams that people see on their televisions. The other work that the Hunslets and the Batleys and the Dewsburys and the other West Yorkshire teams that aren't full-time are doing is community-based but slightly different. And it's almost if we have two halves of the same game now, and how we reconcile that and become inclusive and diversive and make the most of Jamaica being based in Leeds during the World Cup, and do Ikram's programmes with South Asians, some of whom will want a great night out on a Friday night watching maybe Leeds play at Headingley or Huddersfield play at the John Smiths, but they want their sons to play with Hunslet Parkside and gravitate through to maybe the Hunslet semi-professional team. I'm not sure we've got a handle on any of that, so I'd be sort of really interested to hear how you think we can reconcile all of that.
I think the capacity is an issue. We mentioned it, finances. Are we able to do it? Do we have enough finances? I think a lot of it, for me, is down to mindset and attitudes towards these areas. I've always said, I've written it down here, it's really important. It has to be embedded in the culture of what we're trying to achieve. It has to be in an individual's DNA that they automatically do it. It's not something that we have to do because we get bonus points or extra funding. It's actually part and parcel of our makeup. In regards to the capacity, I think, the local clubs, no disrespect to them, I think they can only manage what they can. So they probably focus on the traditional sports, traditional spectator fan base. Although cases demonstrated that Hunslet, for example, I'm going much wider, and respect to that. That's fantastic to hear and see. In regards to the politics, which is really important because we talked about West Yorkshire, and obviously I'm supporting and endorsing Treiziste, a good friend of mine. And before I go on to that, just back to Greg Mulholland, he was a great chair for the parliamentary group for many years. And whilst he's not a parliamentarian now, he's only across the road. We should just pick up the phone and speak to him about the way of politics and how sport can, the promotion of Rugby League. A wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience, loves the game, and we don't really engage with people like that who I think can be invaluable for us. Tracy certainly is a rugby person. She likes her rugby. She can be seen at Batley when she has time. I think she's going to be a good mayor if she gets the role. I'm certainly supporting that. And then obviously the speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, has a lot of influence, can have a lot of influence. So we should be using these individuals as a governing body to make sure our voice, Rugby League, it goes right to the top.
I think one of the things that I'd really want to emphasise in terms of the report, in terms of what we do, is that if we want actually to have women's Super League players paid, then it needs to be stated, it needs to be a plan, it needs to be people are held accountable for making it happen. And likewise, if we really think it is the case that Rugby League as a whole, individual clubs, need to engage more actively with South Asian communities, then that needs to be something which is a stated plan, and it needs to be something which is actually held accountable. And so I think that, these are the sorts of headlines, these are the sorts of policies which actually go together with quite a lot of the broader debate that's happening around the West Yorkshire mayoral candidates. I know for a fact from talking to a couple of the candidates already that, for example, the role of Rugby League in what they call COVID recovery is something that they are very interested in. I know for a fact that particularly in the Heavy Woolen district, that there is a lot of chat about the role that Rugby League can play in terms of addressing some of the divides between certain communities. And I know that that's already on the agenda, and actually people are looking for people to engage in it. They're looking for people to provide answers to it. And so I think actually there are opportunities in terms of what goes forward in terms of adult skills, what goes forward in terms of policing, what goes forward in terms of transport, what goes forward in terms of the functional power competence that the mayor's actually going to have to take the initiative on things in a similar way to Andy Burnham has done with Greater Manchester. I think that the answer to Phil's question is no, we haven't got a handle on it. And, my hope to a certain extent with the report was to put some stuff out there that people would agree with or disagree with, and that's totally okay, but would debate it and engage with it. And if people don't like the opinions, the recommendations that I've put in there, that's fine. But tell me what you think should be different. Part of the role of Same Skies across this period since 2015, and specifically within the West Yorkshire mayoral election, is to try and get people talking about stuff in all sorts of different ways. There's all sorts of stuff going on with new homes, with the circular economy, within transport, all sorts of different areas. And so, that's what I really want to happen. And as I say, Phil, I don't think it's the case at the moment, but that's where we should be going as a game.
Now, in 2001, when I bought £25 worth of shares in Wakefield Trinity, that wasn't necessarily the model of fan ownership you're talking about in this report, Ian. That was more of a cynical cash grab by a club who were desperate for cash. Kacy, Hunslet are a fan-owned club. How does that work, and how can other clubs follow that method?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've only joined the club since September of this year, so I'm still getting to grips with exactly how it works and so on and so forth. But I think the premise is that obviously we are, as a supporter-owned club, we're having, more supporters have a voice within the club on the decision-making. It gives us greater accountability when it comes to our governance, what our plans are for the future and the strategy that sits behind that. And we have to think creatively of how then we're going to generate additional revenue streams. And as I mentioned before, I believe, the club was, in financial difficulties in 2019, and we've looked to then obviously, and then we have had COVID, but we've been quite conservative. We've drawn down, some of the RFL loans, but our plan is not to touch them. We want to look at things slightly different. So us starting up a new podcast series to then, foster better engagement and reconnect with those supporters, but then also be something that isn't just Hunslet based. It's something for people that love rugby league. And then if we can commercialize that and monetize that, then fantastic. If then that drives up, merchandise revenue streams, in different opportunities, that's where we're trying to make sure that we are thinking, about the future sustainability of the club. And yes, that comes with its challenges because of the fact that, again, as I say, as a board and running a club, you want to think strategic. You don't want to have to think really, or you want to then be able to hire people to operate the club on an operational level, where our board at the moment is doing everything. Yeah, we have obviously the players that have just come back off a furlough, but we have nobody really at this moment in time that is paid to do what you would think of your match day experience, and that what the club has recognized, which I hold them, huge amounts of credit for, is, they contacted me after hearing about my research and asked me if I wanted to come and be a non-executive director, because they recognize the gaps of knowledge or the gaps in the resources that they potentially have. So while still being a very traditional club, they are very forward thinking, but also in a conservative manner. And so it is successful within its means. And if that means, yes, we have aspirations, with the 2 promotion spots this year to get into the championship. We are restructuring our sponsorship program. We're restructuring our merchandise. We're looking at ways in which we can reposition our membership offerings, to give something that we value from that. And then we will look at other opportunities in which we can help, hopefully kind of monetize things. So I suppose it's one of those things that I suppose there's huge barriers for being a supporter-owned club. If you look at football, there's lots of examples where it has not necessarily panned out. And I think, us being the only supporter-owned club left is a unique selling point, but it's an actual massive challenge. And one of the things that I recommended back in 2014, to the RFL is we need to, if the sport is about cooperation, right, and not necessarily just looking out for our own personal gain, then we have to use shared resources. And that shared resources might need to be differentiated from, the Super League to Championship and League One. If this next broadcasting deal that comes through and we don't see the pound signs that we need to see, the people that are going to suffer the most is League One. That's without a doubt. And then that's going to have a massive impact on the sport. It's going to have a massive impact on the community. It potentially comes back to the women's game. If we have less money coming in from broadcasters? Now, I know broadcasters are interested in the women, so that might actually be, again, something that might, I suppose, be a benefit, to the broadcasting deal. But we will then see, as a supporter-owned club, you have to then make tough decisions, and you have to think creatively. So again, one of the things that I've not only brought my, I suppose, expertise around marketing, but I've also brought students. Yeah. So, and you can do it with any university, but Leeds Beckett obviously is fantastic, by the way. But, part of the unique model that we have within Hunslet is yes, we work with lots of partnering sport organizations. We'll have, if any rugby league club wants a placement student, get in touch. We're not partial to just West Yorkshire. We've got students that are up and down the country, but equally, I think the thing that's unique is me being embedded in the club, seeing the challenges that they have. We then recruit students and some of our master's students and undergraduate students to then be able to operationalize and deliver on some of these aspects where I don't have the time to write a full sponsorship strategy. So I've got a student focusing on sponsorship, another one on merchandise, and another one social media. And then we have oversight, and we work very closely with the board about what the priorities are. And at the end of the day, we also have to be held accountable to the return on investment model by the RFL, because we get money based on our performance off the pitch. So the part of the challenge with the shared resources is, if I'm going to share my good practice of what we're doing at Hunslet, or York wants to, share their expertise, or, someone else, Workington, or that are in our division, we might be going, hang on a second, we don't want to tell them what we're doing and how we're doing it, because if they perform better on their social media metrics, we're not going to get as much money. So that there's a problem with that as well. So, there's things to elevate, so obviously a return on investment model to hold. Because I do think, at the end of the day, we are sport businesses. We have to be held accountable. Whether we're held to the same account as Super League teams, that's a different story. And actually, we were talking about the framing of the future. And because I'm doing a PhD, I have one of the lovely copies of the framing of the future right there. So that's like gold dust. So, when we talk about minimum standards return on investment model, we have to think in a more business-like, but cooperation and shared resources when you do not have a huge amount of money within the game is really where I think we could be better at.
One of the successes over this period, which has been so traumatic for society, and clearly sport has to be seen for what it is in terms of this, is our ability to go to government at the moment to draw down finance. You can argue about the amount compared to other sports. That's really irrelevant. What we've done is we've proved to a government that is clearly interested in investing in the north of England, and trying to, if possible, close the divide. Whether that's all rhetoric or not remains to be seen. But there is a willingness to invest in the north, and we've proved to them that some of the policies that we stand for is worthy of financial support. How do we extend that? I mean, one of the ways we did that was unity. Clearly, there is a lot of disunity in the sport at the moment. I think Kacy's just highlighted some of those areas that, you have to be held to a level of standards. But if that is detracting you from sharing best practice, then it's actually self-defeating after a while. How do we show to the West Yorkshire Mayor that there is an element of unity within the sport that is worthy of greater both establishment and financial support, that would further strengthen their position, but also would allow us perhaps to be seen as the sport to back if you've got limited resource?
I mean, I think that one of the ways is to actually be open to what the West Yorkshire Mayor has got to offer, and to actually engage actively in terms of fans, in terms of clubs, in terms of media, and actually say, this is a new thing, and that there are opportunities which come with it. And it's not going to be easy. I mean, setting something like that up and taking it forward, whoever is elected, it's not going to be easy actually to take on that role and to balance all of the things. It's almost like middle management, really, in terms of you've got people from below wanting certain things and government holding back and not really giving you the power and resources you want to be able to take it forward. And so, I think, first of all, having that open, positive engagement with the role of West Yorkshire Mayor and said, okay, we want to make it work for you just as much as we want you to help us make Rugby League work. That'd be one of the things. I mean, another thing that, a specific thing that I've mentioned already to a couple of the mayoral candidates is that I'd like to see them actually put together some kind of commission or investigation or something of their own after they're elected, and for them to actually try and find ways to make sure that that's made up with people who represent the future, have ideas about the future, perhaps, the sort of people who are involved in this podcast in all reality. Because, I think having that kind of engagement and that kind of willingness to try and make it work, to give a bit and to take a bit, is one of the ways forward. But my particular point about why it's so important to engage with regional democracy, in this case the mayor, is for what you were saying earlier on, Phil, in terms of we have a government who are currently interested, not necessarily interested in the past, not necessarily interested in the future. There is a specific thing around Westminster politics at the moment, which means that places like Wakefield are particularly important to the electoral prospects of the current government. It's not necessarily been the case in the past, and in future it may well not be the case as well. There was, lots of interest in Worcester Mondeo man in the past, and that seems to have disappeared. And, Workington man's kind of trendy just now, but, maybe in the future that won't be the case. But for West Yorkshire's mayor, it will always be the case that rugby league is important, and you cannot really aim to represent West Yorkshire without engaging with rugby league. So I'd say we should be actually supporting the West Yorkshire mayor to make the role a success, and in fact aiming to support in Greater Manchester and in Merseyside as well. And hopefully Hull and East Riding will also get a devolution deal where they are able to take it forward themselves and actually trying to make it work, because longer term, I think it's better to have power and resources devolved to the places where rugby league really matters just now for the future of rugby league to be sustainable than it will to always think that Westminster is going to be interested in us, because it's not been in the past, and I can't see it being in the future when the electoral cycle moves on to other marginals in other parts of the UK.
I mean, just on that note, I would say that the primary opportunity to then again raise the awareness is what we have on our doorstep, in a few months, hopefully, fingers crossed, a few months' time, with the Rugby League World Cup, because that is going to be a showpiece event, which is going to be truly inclusive and one of the first of its kind. And that's where we can almost reposition or re-image and use that as a springboard to, re-image what the identity is going to be like in the future.
Yeah, I think maybe it comes back again to what we're talking about, our confidence as a sport, and being able to go to government and business and kind of explain what our values are and what our plan is, for the future. Can rugby league kind of values align with this government's values? We might not want to do that, we might not be comfortable doing that, but when we're asking for money, they kind of want to see something out of it, and we can explain, successful sports club is an economic multiplier in a poor area, it can help businesses around it once we get back out of COVID. And if we need support to get ourselves back on our feet, well, it's actually going to be beneficial. And I think it was the Rugby League dividend report, wasn't it, that came out a couple of years ago, which said exactly this. We need to be doing more things like that, I would suggest, and making it just clearer, being more confident about the great things that we do. And I suppose also, just thinking more broadly, can we start to make our players more accessible to government initiatives? I read recently that the government are going to do a massive tackling obesity drive post-COVID, because they think that was one of the reasons, that we were worse affected than other countries. And on the list of the most deprived towns and obese towns, there was a lot of rugby league towns on there. We've got an avenue into these areas through our players, through our clubs, and we can say, all right, well, you want to target these areas, we can do it, but we need money to do it. We need to do healthy initiatives. If you want Kevin Sinfield to front a national campaign, a Matt Hancock app, whatever it is, yeah, you can do it, but we're going to need the resources. Thinking outside the box, just stuff like that, I think, and it also, gives rugby league a bit of a kind of national story. We're embedded. We can send our players onto LBC and TalkSport when we're launching these initiatives and just do things a little bit differently. So I think that would probably be a bit of a way of trying to bring politicians on board, thinking also what we can do for them, not always what they can do for us, because ultimately they're going to want something out of it. And, we can do things if we're confident enough about it.
There's a much bigger pull in something like TalkSport than saying you're doing a podcast. I can tell you that for sure. And the more people can get in those positions, the better.
Well, that's it. I don't see why not. We should be more confident about it and, not shy away from it. But we need to, have a message, a reason to do it. And, maybe actually, this relationship with the government, I don't know what it is, but we should exploit it. And again, the Labour Party are probably going to want to win back these seats in 4 years' time. They're probably going to try and make a big post-COVID offer to Lee, Wakefield and Workington and these places. Should Rugby League be in there now saying, okay, this is how you can help the community? You want to win back these places? Well, Rugby League is a big part of these places. And, as I say, economic multiplier, we can maybe help you out on that as well. I don't know. It's a while away, the next election yet. So Ian's got a lot to write before then, probably.
Guys, I'll just sort of come in if you allow me to. I mean, Tony mentioned about players, our comment, it's been mentioned before. They are the face of our game, male and female, and we should use them. And like you say, rather to the politicians, what we want from you, this is what we can give to you. I think back in the day, it was contracted in each player's contract about sort of work they do for the club, going out to the community. Sort of bring that back again, because that added a lot of value, certainly to the community, to the turnstiles, but we're offering something different now to the government, and our players are great role models and certainly can do a lot of damage out there. In relation to the politics, I think we've got no choice. I mean, the current sort of party in charge, we work with them to the best of what we can, and we keep pushing it. We might still get to a stage where they see how we think and the way we are. It's always possible. I always think that rather than sort of turn a shoulder and going the other way, let's work together. Certainly in the all party groups that I've been at, a lot of things have happened, and be interesting to see how that works for the future. So let's not see that as a negative. Let's see that as a positive.
I think we've got to be thinking outside the box more about what we're asking for as well. So I think, sort of the money that we've got from the government could and probably should have been used to fund some sort of fan ownership. So I think that initially it was £16 million loan, wasn't it? Which, side note, I don't think a loan for clubs with no incomes is possibly the smartest idea, but that's another story. But that could and probably should perhaps have been given on a condition that, right, you put fans on the board, or you have some sort of fan representation at the club. And I think it's really interesting that the right-wing think tank called Onward, they were actually the ones that came up with the Workington man thing that won the government a lot of northern seats. They, in May last year, said the same sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying I'm making the weather among right-wing think tanks, because I'm not. If we're both coming to the same conclusion, then there's got to be something in it. They pointed to the 50+1 rule in German football. So where in all but 2 or 3 clubs, I think, the fans have majority voting rights on the board. So they basically control the direction of the club. And Onward sort of said that, it'd lead to transparency, which is one of the things that Ian talks about in his report, transparency, accountability, all that sort of thing. And it'd lead to sort of longer term thinking and more sustainable long term thinking, which is what I think Rugby League needs. It's definitely something we need. How we get to, something similar to 50+1 in Rugby League, I've no idea. But, I think we should have been, and we probably still could ask for, one of the things Onward were asking for was an equity stake taken for the loan. And then if that's not repaid to the government from the clubs that have taken this money, selling that to supporters groups. So there's various ways we could get there, but I think that's something that we need to be looking at, and we need to be thinking about, the type of thing that we're asking for as well.
Yeah, just to pick up there on what Jack was saying, the Onwards report, Sporting Chance, like the RL Dividend report from Manchester Met, with two of the sources I used in terms of trying to put together the ideas for Same Skies report. And one of the things that was really interesting about both of them was that they were trying to get into rugby league finances, but actually there was quite a lot of information that they couldn't get hold of. And so on one level, in terms of us having this discussion now, in terms of thinking about the future, we're kind of guessing at things a little bit. There's a lot of detail we don't have to be able to really understand the extent to which, for example, it might be possible to play Women's Super League players. And that kind of transparency will be quite important. Likewise, in terms of what happened with Toronto, I think, one of the things that really bothered me about the whole situation was that in terms of the business practices that were going on, in terms of the way in which Toronto were funded, there was a lot of stuff that people didn't really know or didn't really access in terms of information, which, when it was discovered, could give us clues really about the way things were going and what the future might be. So again, in terms of the transparency of what was going on there, actually, we could have known more and earlier, which would have helped us to engage with that situation and deal with it a lot better than we did as a game. So in terms of, the opportunities for fan ownership, I see that as being part of the outcome, that we're able to be more accessible in terms of the finances of the clubs. We've got early warning systems in terms of where things might be going wrong further down the line, and that we're able to really value the clubs as community assets so that when there is danger ahead, we're more able to get politics involved, to get businesses involved, to get media involved, to actually deal with it earlier rather than allow it to be something which is perhaps a bit more of a vanity project. And ultimately we find out further down the line when it's too late what's going on. So specifically the community ownership fund that was talked about in the Onward report was actually launched last month. And there's more details coming out about it in June. But within that, it's a 150 million fund for community ownership of what are considered locally to be assets of value. So there's a lot of the media headlines nationally about it were in terms of pubs, and particularly related back to what's happened with COVID. But, to me, it feels like if Rugby League is going to be able to take advantage of the opportunity or further opportunities, what we actually need is for some of that to be devolved, or somehow for West Yorkshire Mayor to be able to have an active engagement in saying, actually, if we are going to develop fan ownership within West Yorkshire, if Rugby League is actually going to see that as a potential model, then we need that kind of engagement with it. I don't think necessarily what's proposed in terms of community ownership fund is in itself fully the answer. One of the things within there is it talks about it being part of the Levelling Up strategy. And of course, actually, a lot of the criteria they use for identifying areas for that aren't necessarily the sort of criteria that I might support in terms of identifying who really needs it. So, there are questions there in terms of whether or not it's really going to do the job it wants it to do. But actually, Rugby League needs to get the West Yorkshire Mayor on our case and actually addressing some of those issues, either in terms of making sure the opportunities of fan ownership are able to be taken up by fan groups in West Yorkshire, or actually saying this is not good enough. Actually, we need to do something different. We need to do something better.
As this programme was born out of a vanity project, I always love hearing those two words. We're running low on time, so we'll wrap up in a moment. I will go around and ask everyone for their message for the new Mayor of West Yorkshire. But is there anything, Ian, we've missed that you think we should have discussed, or that I've missed, rather, that I should have brought up?
No, not particularly. I just want to say thanks to everybody for engaging. You're all brilliant people who I've loved reading and hearing from in all sorts of different ways, and so much of what you yourselves have been doing inspired me to put things into the report. So thank you very much for engaging today, and I hope maybe we've inspired others to engage with regional democracy and Rugby League's place in the West Yorkshire mayoral election and the future.
Phil, apart from buy a subscription to 4020 magazine, of course, what is your message? Well,
some good writers.
What is the message to the next Mayor of West Yorkshire?
I think it's more a message to ourselves that this is the start of a very important debate. I think we've touched on a lot of issues in the time that we've been together that don't get spoken about. And the important thing I've taken from reading Ian's paper, being able to feature it in the magazine, for which we were grateful, Anthony's work, which again, really grateful that he's contributed, reading Jack's stuff, listening to Kacy's podcasts, and obviously clearly taking on board the fact that we have an absolute marketing professional here, which is something that the sport hasn't tapped into enough. Always listening to what Ikram's got to say on the basis of the fact that I like he, no doubt, am fed up that he is put forward as a face of something that was 30 years ago, which clearly means we haven't done enough to capitalise on that in the time since. It's brilliant that he's looking younger than he's ever looked before, which slightly annoys me. But I think we need to get away from the fact that, he is unique, and we need to listen to people like the communities that he so clearly represents, and not just impose upon them, but take from them what they need. I think the message is more to the game. I think what I've learned out of tonight is if we're going to be serious about going to politicians, being represented, making a case to them about why the sport is the one that epitomises the values that they stand for more than any other, that we've got to decide who we are, what we stand for in the current society as it's structured, and not necessarily historically what it has been. And that debate is vital. And if Ian's paper has started that, if the people around this forum have helped to further that, if there is more debate that can be had on the back of that, then I would hope that anybody who's listened to this or watched this will engage, because that's the only way we can move forward.
Ikram, what would be your message then to the future mayor? Oh, you're muting. Ikram, you have to mute yourself and start it again.
Sorry, guys.
We'll be all glad when we don't have to do these things.
I've had a guy next to me and he's making a lot of noise, so I had to cut it down. So I do apologise. I've wrote it down here.
We've usually got one of those actually next to us on a Monday.
I would say celebrate similarities and respect differences. I think the time that we've had, it's been quite diverse what we've spoken about. I think the area that, as you know, I keep banging on about it because not a great deal being done. I think is a separate issue. It takes a lot longer to discuss. I think it's an area on its own. I think we haven't done that, and that's why we haven't gone too far in and developed that area. In regards to the mayor, I think what Phil said is spot on. I think we need to take care of our own house first. And if it was sort of kicking and running really well, they'll want to get involved with us. We won't have to go to them. They'll think this is a part of West Yorkshire. This is a great product. This is a great sport. This is going to help me with my campaign. And it's not there at this moment of time. But certainly we'll talk about it now. And I know it's only around the corner now. As I mentioned before, I've got my... I'm in the Treiziste Braving camp. I think it should be good for our sports, and hopefully we can build from there.
Anthony, I'm not going to ask you who you're backing, by the way, because I don't know if
do I have to provide a counter argument to balance on all these shows we usually do?
We're not on the BBC. We're not on ITV. This is the internet. It's a lawless society. You can say what you want almost.
I echo everything you both just said. I think first it's been an absolute pleasure just to chat ideas and develop them, because it's clear that there's so many kind of great energy within the game that we don't hear a lot as well. And that might be the message to the mayor, I suppose. It's to try and find, in rugby league terms, the ideas, the thinking outside the box, because it may actually benefit yourself. Because in politics, in society in general, I think people do want a bigger stake in things, more control, more influence, just a bigger say over the way their lives are run, and rugby league is a big part of that. So if you can capture that, if you can kind of give people something to rally around, a bit of pride, if it's local, national, whatever, you get it, read Ian's report and, take many of the great things that are in it and, kick on from there, I would say.
I suppose my message is build on the history and heritage of the sport, revisit the communities, embrace the diversity of those communities and evolving of those communities, and recognize that rugby league has a huge opportunity to be many things to many people. And if it then creates exposure or platforms, to deliver those messages or address social issues or economic issues, then the investment will come. And I don't mean just economic investment, I mean social investments for the next generation.
I'd like to go down, well, before I give my final statement, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me, and it's the first time I've done anything like this, so thanks everyone for being gentle with me. But I'd like to go down the route that Phil went down and sort of give a call to arms for rugby league fans. A lot of the things we've spoken about tonight, giving our players a bigger platform, building movements for fan ownership and having a bigger say in rugby league. That's something that we've got to do. No one's going to do that for us. And we've all got a role to play. There's some really good work going on at the minute with Rugby League Uncovered. I think, Phil, you've covered it in Forty20, haven't you? After the World Cup, I think they're looking to be sort of a bit more of a fan voice. So there's plenty for rugby league fans to be getting on with. And like I said, no one's going to do it for us. It's something that we've got to do.
Obviously, as a born cynic, my message to them would be turn up at rugby league games, not when there's just an election, as we tend to see in Wakefield, where a parade of MPs and prospective MPs turn up and say, "Oh yeah, you can have that stadium," and then disappear for another. Well, I would say 5 years, but they seem to these elections come around much more often these days. But that's just me being cynical. Well, I mean, there is that as well. Ian, what obviously you've written this report. I'm sure they've all had a copy, but what is your message to whoever does take up this role in the next few weeks?
I'd say rugby league is an inspiration. A bunch of people decided they weren't just going to whinge about something that's wrong. They actually stood up and did something about it. And those were people right here. So actually, take inspiration from rugby league, engage with rugby league, and it will be for the better of the role of the West Yorkshire Mayor and for regional democracy.
I'm sure, Phil, at this point we're supposed to do the predictions, but...
Who's going to be the West Yorkshire Mayor?
I mean, hopefully, people who listen to this who do have a vote, obviously not our Lancastrian friends, they don't get to vote on this one, but do the research and pick the candidate they think best for the job and all that kind of thing. Get out and vote, because people died for you to have the opportunity for you to do this, and that is a serious privilege we all have. It's been an interesting couple of hours, and I hope people have taken something from it. Ian, thank you for getting in touch with us to set all this up, and to Anthony, Ikram, Jack and Kacy, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts, and plenty of interesting things for people to think about. And yeah, get out and vote, and we'll talk again about rugby league and politics and things again soon, if we're all willing to do so.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, Forty20.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
See you in 4 years' time.